Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, here today with another episode of Thrifty Tunes. We're going to be taking a look at a new-ish budget IEM from CCZ. This here is the Solo, also known as the DC02. It launched at the end of September in 2024, priced at $25. This is yet another budget single dynamic driver entry into the rapidly ballooning $25 price class. Does the Solo here do enough to distinguish itself, or is it going to get lost in the sauce? Let's find out. Quick disclaimer, this particular unit of the CCZ Solo was sent to me by CCZ themselves. They wanted me to just check it out with no obligation to review. I'm not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell these if I wanted, I have gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there is potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you very much to CCZ for sending me this set, and thank you all very much for your support. So, we'll kick things off with the unboxing experience. I would say that it's in line with other IEMs at this price point. You get a small space-saving box inside the IEMs and the cable. You also get 3 sets of silicone ear tips in the typical small, medium, and large sizes. Yeah, I'd say that this is a fairly typical unboxing experience / accessories package for IEMs at or below this price point. Y'all know me, I personally would have preferred a carry pouch or maybe a second set of ear tips. You know, there's other IEMs in this price range that offer them, but I'm not going to knock any points off of the Solo for being average. Moving on to the cable. As far as budget sets go, I'd say this one is on the slightly better end of the scale. It wraps well, but as you saw when it was sitting here, it does still have memory from when I unboxed it originally. The 3.5mm connector has this pretty cool right angle shape to it. I like that, you know, sort of ergonomic design. I like the CCZ logo on the end of it. What I don't like as much on this cable is the Y-split and chin slider design. I really am not a fan of this sort of rectangular 2 separate wires thing because you can end up getting to look like that, which I don't like very much. It is functional. The cable is a 4-wire weave that splits into a 2-wire twist. These 2-wire twists are slightly microphonic, but any cable that has this design is going to be microphonic, and I'm not really going to knock it points for that. As far as the 2-pin connectors go, these are the Type B connectors. You can see from how squared off they are. They have very clear LNR marking. The hooks are, you know, not too rubbery. They're nice and comfortable. Overall, you know, considering the microphonics, they're not as bad as they are in cloth cables. It's par for the course for this type of design. I'm not going to knock it any points for the microphonics. Overall, I would say this cable reminds me a lot of the cable that you get on the KB Ear Rosefinch. And I actually went and looked while I was scripting this review, and yeah, the right angle connector is a bit different, but this is essentially a black version of the cable on the TRN Rosefinch. So while it might not be my favorite cable in the budget range, it's also not my least favorite cable in the budget range. Moving on to build quality. These are injected molded shells with metal nozzles and a metal top plate. The nozzle here is glued in place and features a mesh filter sort of inlaid into the top. As far as ventilation goes, you have your typical single vent over the driver and another vent here over by that sort of rubberized comfort wing. I will say, as far as the ventilation goes, I don't know if it was the tips I was using. I was using Divinus Velvets on these or the SpinFit CP145s. I did encounter driver flicks on these every once in a while when I was inserting them, especially when I was taking them out. So that's something for you guys to keep an eye on. But about that comfort fin, it does have a sort of rubberized coating on it. It's not the softest thing in the world. It's actually pretty rigid. But it does feel nicer against the ear than, I would say, hard plastic. The top plate here is solid metal, and it doesn't have any additional ventilation or, you know, holes in it. I would say it's an overall simple design, typical for this price range. It does feel pretty solid in the hands. The metal faceplate helps give it some heft. And I'm going to say again that QDC Type B connector, that square shape of it, I feel is actually more durable than standard QDC. So that's nice, but finding aftermarket cables that fit this will be a bit more difficult. So time for specifications. The Solo here employs a 10mm dynamic driver, as is pretty typical of budget sets in this price bracket. The diaphragm is a polyurethane plus polyethylene composite, and the drivability isn't anything to worry about. With a 20 ohm impedance and a sensitivity of 103, this easily ran out of my old Sony Xperia as well as my old CD player. So you shouldn't have any problems using this with phones, tablets, or laptops. In terms of weight, these are a bit on the heavier side thanks to that all-metal faceplate, but nothing super heavy. The nozzles here are smaller than average for the IEMs in my collection, so that plus the weight and the little rubber wing should make these quite comfortable. But overall, the specifications here are pretty standard, so we'll go ahead and move on. And we'll go ahead and move on to the Cool Wall. I really don't expect a lot from IEMs at this price range in terms of overall design. Elaborate designs are expensive to implement, and I'd rather they take that money and put it into the driver, which is why I don't think we see them that much at this price range. You know, that being said, I do think CCZ could have done a little bit more to make these shells just, I don't know, pop a bit more or look maybe a little bit different. A splash of paint would have gone, you know, nicely with these. These are about as plain as you can get. You get that sort of swoosh design and the CCZ logo and the engraving of the name, and that's basically it. You do get a choice between black and silver, but honestly, both colors are just kind of plain in my opinion. So I'm going to put these in bland because I think that's what they are, and you know, what you see is what you get with these. That said, I do not expect the Solo to score great with the ladies, but you never know, any given Sunday and all that, but let's go ahead and check in with them. So right off the bat, the Council of Ladies does not think this is pretty. We get 3 mehs and a couple of no's, and it's looking like the set doesn't really vibe with them. That'll transition easily into no compliments for wearing these, but let's have a look at their thoughts. Utilitarian, cheap, boring. Yeah, they didn't hold back with their comments on these. Well, looks aren't everything, so let's move on to comfort. The comfort, I feel, is this IEM's strongest point. For me, like I said, the rubber wing combined with the narrow nozzles and the overall lightweight made this a all-day comfort IEM for me. I had 0 issues wearing these for long periods of time. The ear hooks worked well for me. My wife reported similar. The ear hooks worked for her. She gave these an easy pass on her tiny ears test. She didn't notice any extra comfort from the rubber wing. I had to mention that it was even a thing before, you know, she didn't say anything about it. But yeah, she said that they weren't too heavy, that the nozzles took her ear tips well, and that the ear hooks fit her well, so these got an easy pass on the tiny ears test. But enough about the non-audio properties, let's get into how these sound. Kicking things off with the bass. The bass on the Solo is quite hefty. I think bass lovers will really enjoy the presentation here. The sub bass is rumbly and the mid bass is punchy. Tiesto's Boom collab with 7 has that deep rumble that I expected it to have. The decay is a little slower than I prefer, meaning that the rumble doesn't have the staying power that I would like, but honestly I think it's a pretty decent performance for a boost of this level. The kick drums and bass guitar in other songs also benefit from the energy that's down here. The iconic bass drum at the beginning of When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin has the exaggerated produced sound that it was designed to have, and the bass guitar on that track also doesn't find itself drowned out or lost by other instruments. This isn't what I would consider a full-on bass headset, but the Solo, you know, lives in the same neighborhood, shops at the same stores, if you know what I mean. Going to the mid-range, the mids are basically part of the price that we have to pay for the fun that we're having with the bass. The lower mids are definitely warmed up, and there is a definite recession to some of the instruments here. Stone Temple Pilot's Plush, for example. You have Scott Weiland's iconic vocals, which, as I mentioned before, I think are actually helped out by the extra warmth that the bass boost imparts on the lower mids. What I don't like about this replay, though, is the subtle acoustic guitar that's, you know, sort of near the back of the mix. It's just barely audible in the left ear. If you're sort of focusing on it and looking for it, you'll find it, but it's really, you know, not prominent compared to a set with, you know, what I would call cleaner or more neutral mid-range. Female vocals are impacted by the mid-range recession and, you know, the mid-bass boost. I feel like Maria Takeuchi's vocals in her hit Plastic Love lose a little bit of the shine and sparkle that they had. They aren't super ultra husky like they can be on sets that don't handle the bass boost quite as well, but they also aren't as natural as I would like overall. Like in Plush, some of the rhythm guitars that live in the right ear can get lost when the mix gets very busy, in the chorus specifically. I would say, as in most V-shaped sets like this, the mids are not great, but they're passable. You can tell right away that the mid-range was not the focus of this tuning. Next up, we have the upper mids and the treble. I sort of alluded to this already, but this is a very V-shaped set, and there's a lot of energy up here to go along with that. Female vocals I found could come across a little bit edgy depending on how things are mastered. I use the Supremes' Baby Love, for example, as a test for sibilance. That track is already mastered pretty hot, and it has some sibilance in the recording itself, like no matter what set you're listening to it on. This set will exaggerate those flaws. Both vocals and percussion harmonics on that song come off quite a bit sharp, and they have a bit of an edge to them in not the best way. It's great if you love that extra emphasis. If you really love that extra shine on vocals and you love the sort of edginess and sharpness to them, that's great. But personally, it did get fatiguing even at moderate volumes, and I found myself turning it down to sort of alleviate that fatigue. The percussion harmonics can have a similar emphasis. Pointer Sisters Automatic, for example. The constant hi-hats in the right ear will end up tiring your ears unless you turn the volume down, a little bit lower than you're used to listening at. The treble here has excellent detail. People who love sparkle and treble energy will be really, really happy here, but for me, this is just a little too much. As far as technicalities go, on the low end, this set easily passes my Steely Dan Black Cow test. The echo of the bass guitar in the beginning is extremely easy to make out. It has the detail it's supposed to have. It's actually present in both ears, which is actually more typical of a heavier bass set than a more neutral set, but I don't think it's completely overblown like it can be on some full-on bass headsets. As far as moving up in the range goes, as I mentioned in the mids, some instruments will get masked or pushed back in the mix compared to others, but the top-end technicalities are there. All the different cymbal hits, all the texture from the sticks and the bells in Art Pepper's Star Eyes will be clearly audible to you. It's super easy to make out all the little nuances in the drum performance. And overall, other than the mid-range, I think the technicalities on this set are well done. I think it's a pretty decent driver in here. For stereo separation, I used Teg Nugent's Stranglehold this time for two reasons. Number one, the sort of cymbal shift effect is a good way of seeing how wide a set can sound. And number two, I wanted to see if that same cymbal, shift effect wound up being fatiguing at all. The answers are, in terms of, stereo separation, this set I would say is about average. There was a good distance for the effect to travel from ear to ear. And yes, the effect is a bit fatiguing if you have it, sort of at moderate to higher moderate volumes. As far as the soundstage performance goes, the contrasty tuning on this set and that dip in the mids actually does help to accentuate soundstage a bit. It gives things a little bit of depth and a bit of height. Stan Getz's Samba Triste has plenty of spatial information in the mastering, and this set won't hold back or compress that information in the replay. I feel like in well-mastered tracks, this set has a bit above average soundstage performance. So, the CCZ Solo DC-02, it's a hard V-shape with recessed mids, boosted bass, and boosted highs. It's kind of an old-school hard V-shape tuning. This isn't the sort of bright neutral headphone like the Truthier Gate. It isn't a warm V-shape like the 02 or the Vivace. It isn't bright like the original 7Hz Zero, and it isn't what I would call the newer, gentler V-shape like on the KZ EDC Pro, or even more mild V-shape like on the Moondrop Chew. This is 100% an old school V-shape. It is a vintage V-shape, if you will, and I have two other members of that club lined up here to compare it against. But before we get into the two actual comparisons, I wanted to start off with a set that will sort of give you an idea of how much bass to expect out of the Solo. So this is the QKZ X HBB, priced at $20, and I'm not calling it a comparison because this isn't a V-shape at all. This is a much warmer set compared to the Solos here. And they're not a match in tuning, but it's going to illustrate what I think the bass performance of the Solo is like. The bass on these two is actually quite similar. You have similar levels of mid-bass punch, similar levels of sub-bass rumble. I do feel like the extra venting on the XHBB makes for a slightly cleaner, more textured bass. But overall, in terms of bass quantity and mostly quality, I do think this is a bit higher quality, but mostly in terms of quality, I think these two are very similar. This isn't a comparison really, because in terms of treble, the Solo wins extremely easily. It has so much more energy to push all of those details forward. This is a different tuning. It's much more balanced. It's got a much more full mid-range with better instrumentation, and this isn't fatiguing in the slightest. Like I said, I really just brought this out to give a context as to the bass level on these. So So let me take these away, and let me bring in the first IEMs that came to mind when I was listening to these solos. It's actually the oldest IEMs in my collection, and the first IEMs I ever bought. These are the KZ ZSN Pro X, and I tried to wrap the cable, but that's just how it behaves. So, when I said earlier that the solo here reminds me of an old school sound, it specifically brought to mind the old school, 2018 deep V-shaped KZ sort of house sound. Boosted lows, sparkly highs, recessed mids, a bit too sparkly for some folks, but this sound signature was, and I would say is, very popular. I think that the solo sort of improves on the 2018 KZ formula by increasing some of that bass heft to balance things out a bit more and reducing the overall treble energy. I feel like these two side by side, the solo is a bit warmer tonally compared to the ZSN Pro X. I also think that the solo is actually less fatiguing in some areas than the ZSN Pro X. It is still fatiguing, but it is a good improvement over the sort of older KZ house sound, I would say, by a pretty decent margin. And finally, we have what is probably one of the better sort of hard V-shaped IEMs in this price range. And I also tried to wrap this one, but well, you see what happens to the cable here. This is the Kiwi Ears Dolce, priced at $25, just like the Solo. I never personally really vibed with the Dolce. Something about this absolutely awful stock cable that you have to separate yourself in the conductors I didn't like, and I think it's on my right IEM. Let's see. There's a piece of sprue that they forgot to shave off at the factory on my QDC connector there. So the first impressions of the Solo were not, or sorry, of the Dolce were not very good. And combine that with the hard V shape and the too much treble energy, it just led overall to me not liking it very much. Like with the ZSN Pro X, I personally feel that the Solo is a bit of an improvement on the brighter Dolce by, adding a bit of that bass and reducing the treble overall. The Solo does come across as a little bit more vocal forward than the Dolce, but the Dolce does lean brighter overall. I find both of these to be fatiguing in slightly different ways. It's a bit difficult to explain, but, certain cymbal hits on this one are a bit more dynamic than this one. I do find I'm able to listen to the Solo for longer periods than the Dolce, and honestly, this cable is, look at how it's behaving compared to this one and compared to this one. So it's a better cable. If I had to pick between these three, I would pick these every time. I do, however, feel the Dolce might have a slightly better driver in it, but I still would pick the Solo just because it's less fatiguing for long listening periods. So to sum up, the CCZ Solo here provides QKZ x HBB levels of bass with sort of Kiwi Ears Dolce levels of treble. It's a less fatiguing, slightly more relaxed listening experience than what is the classic, KZ V-shaped house sound that you can find on things like the ZSN Pro X and a couple of others. But overall, the Solo is still fatiguing to my ears, and I would not 100% recommend this to anyone who's even a little bit treble sensitive. In fact, besides the QKZX HBB, I honestly wouldn't recommend any of these three to anyone who is treble sensitive. So, with the comparisons out of the way, it's time to see where the CCZ DC02/Solo winds up on my AudioAmigo Arbitrary rating scale. We'll start off with the good things. These come with quite a nice cable, at least compared to the competition. The comfort wing on these, I think, works really well, and, they're comfortable overall. They're some of the more comfortable IEMs, I would say, in this sort of bracket with this tuning. On the not-so-good side, you have the recessed mids, which I don't prefer, and the treble, which, again, while toned down compared to some of the more excitable sets in this price range, is still a bit too much for me personally after a while. These aren't piercing or shrill unless you're playing some of those hotly mastered tracks I was mentioning earlier, and I would describe this as more of a slow fatigue than an instant piercing fatigue. I'm honestly going to put these in meh, and it's going to be because of one main reason. The price. These are $25, and I know that these go on sale a lot, and they're never really $25, But for my viewers who live in other countries and are always having to pay full price because sales just don't happen or the import duties are crazy, uh, in my opinion, this just does not compete versus the other $25 sets out there. If you can get this for under, say, 20, 15-ish dollars, you can go ahead and move it up to the good tier, but at full price, with that treble and those recessed mids, no matter how nice the bass is, this just doesn't really work well for me. So, probably already know the answer to this, but I cannot recommend the CCZ Solo at MSRP. I just don't personally think it's a good value, and even though it does come with that nicer cable, the tuning is honestly straight out of 2018. It's probably a very nice version of the straight out of 2018 tuning, but honestly, if you want something, V-shaped and bassy, grab the Caster bass. If you want, a V-shape still, but maybe a bit more chilled out with better mids, grab the EDC Pro. If you want bass, the Rosefinch exists, and if you want treble, the 7Hz Zero is there. All of those cost less than this at MSRP, and all of those, I think, sound better for longer listening sessions, in my opinion. If this is on sale for less than 15 bucks, I can maybe recommend it if you really dig that, 2018 KZ house sound, V-shaped sound. I think this is a way to get that with a nicer cable and a slightly more polite treble presentation. But outside of that, I would say if you can get these cheap, maybe you want to harvest the drivers out of these or use this as a test bed for some modding, maybe drill open the vent hole, try different dampeners, shove some mesh down the nozzles there. It could be a decent test bed for some mods. I mean, you could also fix these with EQ, but you'd have to really dig this shell design and really want the nice cable to, EQ these instead of looking for a better looking or better sounding set for you to EQ. Well, that's going to wrap up this one. Thanks again to CCZ for sending these out. I'm sorry for kind of bashing on them. Honestly, guys, a little bit of mesh in the nozzles and some venting would go a long way. I think this is a nice driver. It's not amazing, but it's actually better than some of the other ones I've heard at this price range. Just build around it a bit better. That's all I have to say. It's going to do it for me for now. I appreciate your continued support. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch you all next time.